Okay, from our studios, this time in Detroit and Tampa. This is Green Tag Theme Park in 30. I'm Philip, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host Scott Swenson of Scott Swenson Creative Development. And this week, we're going to talk about some of the changes with IAAPA, and then some delays in some theme park openings, and some rowdy teens. Rowdy teens.
Rowdy teens never happen at the Halloween season, do they?
No,
Ha ha ha
certainly
ha.
not. Certainly not. Okay, so first story here is IAAPA has announced an inaugural IAAPA Expo in the Middle East in Abu Dhabi. IAAPA, for those, I mean, I'm sure everyone listening knows IAAPA, but IAAPA is the big association in theme park industry, and they've announced that they're going to go to launch IAAPA Expo Middle East. It's going to take place from March 30th through April 2nd, 2026. So we got a few years or a year and a half to plan for that. And the release here, it just kind of details how, due to the expansion in the area, and they're going to bring the trade show there and education, kind of as IAAPA does. It was interesting to me that the people who were quoted in the press release, so Jake Yacob, of course, the president and CEO of IAAPA, but also they had the CEO of Morale Group, which was interesting and very telling. Why was he in the press release? But I thought this was really big news, but not surprising news, because, and also, I don't want to say not even not surprising, but interesting, because we've been talking about how the Middle East, of course, is growing, and it was supposed to be China, and then pandemic, and so now we kind of have the Middle East coming up as a potentially overtaking the U.S. market in investment, and so that makes total sense. But what's interesting is there are already attractions shows in that area, and I think that was the hesitation IAAPA originally had, was that there was already shows that have a few years behind them, already bringing the industry together in this area. So it's interesting. And also, IAAPA expos are no small thing, so like one does not simply launch a whole new expo with IAAPA. So I think this was a pretty big decision. So it's just interesting to me that it was such a big decision, but also in a market that already has expos that happen that are pretty large. But I've never worked in that area, and Scott has. Scott, tell me, what do you think?
Well, it makes total sense. First of all, let's go back to the comment about the Morale chair.
Yep.
Uh, so that makes total sense because Morale, in Abu Dhabi, for example, Morale pretty much owns all of the themed attractions. They own, or they either own or are partial owner of SeaWorld, Warner Brothers World, Yas Water World, Ferrari World, and the as yet unnamed another park that's going to be added within the next few years.
Yep.
So, and if I'm not mistaken, the chair is also a member of the royal family, so that helps. That they would definitely be involved. It would be foolish for them not to be involved. Because they pretty much can get stuff done, and that's how these parks are being built so quickly. Is because, first of all, in this part of the world, they have very deep pockets. Secondly, in both the countries that I've worked in the Middle East, they have a strong desire to expand their tourism. So they've got money, they've got passion, and they're bringing in people from around the world to do it. So that seems like a 1, 2, 3 punch. I will say one of the reasons I think that IAAPA maybe dragged its feet a little bit before going in with this, because as you say, there's some other people who got to the plate first. IAAPA in the Middle East is not particularly recognized, and it's not that they have anything negative to say; they just don't know who they are.
Yep.
So because the industry is so new, having done some stuff for Gia in Saudi Arabia, the training is such that we are introducing people not just to what can I do with these skills, we're introducing them to a whole new realm of business. They have no idea at all what a theme park is, the vast majority of people. They're learning, obviously, but they entertainment for them, they just a few years ago just started to allow movie theaters. So they're just they're in the infancy, but the government and the sections of the government that have been tasked with bringing in this kind of entertainment and making it tourism worthy is they're having to work very, very quickly to elevate knowledge and understanding of what a theme park is and how it operates. And it's interesting because what I'm discovering, certainly more in um, Saudi than the UAE, is the unique sort of hybrid that they're creating. They're not creating theme parks that as we would understand them.
Yeah.
They're theme parks with giant picnic groves and
Yep.
bowling alleys. They're kind of taking all their entertainment and putting it together based on what the market will bear and what the audience would like. The UAE is significantly more traditional um, in their theme park mindedness. So I think with this expo coming into the Middle East, and since it's 26, I'm going to do everything I can to go because I would love to. I'm gonna see if I can teach there because I would love to see, first of all, to go back and see what SeaWorld looks like now that it would have been open for, well, what, 3 years by then,
Yep.
2.5 years, and secondly to just kind of touch base and see how the area has expanded. Obviously, during an expo, it's going to be busier because it's going to bring in a lot of people of interest to this. But I think this makes total sense. I think it is. I think it is more or as much to build reputation for IAPA as it is to find a way to get or to have an outlet for vendors. But I think that will come as well. Um, I know that once the government certainly in the UAE, once the government decides they want something, they will do everything they can to bring it in from wherever they need to. So
Yeah.
um, I'm sure they're being welcomed with open arms. Hence the reason the chairman of Morale was mentioned in the press release. So I'm excited. I hope to be there and I hope to be teaching because I think it would be really fun.
I was wondering what this expo is going to bring that the other expos have not brought. And I think it's not about that. I think it's more about what you said, that it is more about IAPA expanding its reach in that area than it
Mhm.
is about really offering something that the market doesn't currently have. I think because my understanding, again, I haven't worked there, but so my understanding of that ecosystem is that a lot of it relies on expats or, people that are not
Mhm.
local. So to me, I'm like, well, you're going to have IAPA Middle East. This is going to be a smaller version of IAPA with the same people. I mean, who's going to really go but the same people who go to everything else?
Well, but keep in mind too, the reason it's currently expats is because nobody in these Middle Eastern countries have any idea or any experience in the themed attraction industry. They're trying to get their long-term goal is to make to make the attractions industry another way of employment. Another way of getting jobs to the locals. This is part of a culture shift for them so that less and less of them are relying on the royal family money and the oil
Hmm.
industry and the money from the oil industry, and more are actually getting jobs. They're trying to get a whole generation. They're trying to train a whole generation to get to get jobs and get jobs that they enjoy, and that's part of the reason that the themed attraction industry in the UAE has, on Yas Island has grown so much, and even going back to the Dubai parks, it's it's been a there's been multiple purposes for a lot of different things, and I think that putting this expo there is going to make the Emirati and the um, other Middle Eastern cultures open their eyes and go, oh, okay, this sounds like fun. Let's do this. Um, and I know that some of my classes that they taught in Saudi, the response was, it was like mind blowing. They had no idea it even existed. They had no idea they could learn to do this. They had no idea they could get paid to do this. So I think that is going to be the real benefit to the area. And I think for IAPA, it's just going to help expand their international recognition.
Okay. Well, again, it's not until 2026, but like you said, it'll be interesting because so many more attractions are debuting and being in that area. So it certainly will be a full expo with just the amount of new experiences that IAAPA has to draw from. So we will be watching. I'm also going to try and go. So we'll see. Okay, so next up, delays have hampered Fright Fest Extreme at Six Flags Great Adventure. This year's celebration of scary things was supposed to open on September 13th, but on September 12th, park officials announced it would open as a preview instead. And again, on September 18th, they said that next weekend was also going to be a second weekend of previews. In a statement, they said, due to unforeseen circumstances, some of our mazes are opening later than expected. But during our Fright Fest Extreme preview weekends, guests have the opportunity to enjoy all of our fall events, all included with their daily park admission. The park representative did not say which mazes have not opened or respond to a question of whether needed inspections are the cause of delays, as some people have theorized. The park season pass holders, meanwhile, have not been too happy and expressed frustration with the delays, in part citing an extra charge that Six Flags was charging for the Fright Fest Extreme attractions. So I discussed this before, but just to clarify too, that Six Flags had they have different season pass tiers, and it's like only the more expensive tier got access to Fright Fest weekends, and that was one of the big selling points of that pass, is it has access to the weekends. And then of course they were selling separate passes for it. So essentially we are 2 weeks into this event and they are still calling it a preview because they're not open, and they have yet to give opening dates for the rest of the mazes. So we've talked about this before, just in terms of, I think we've actually talked about all these elements. We talked about Fright Fest Extreme and how they were trying to expand into markets that don't generally do too much, and how that was going to go. We also talked about the concept of too rapid expansion in a market where the supply chain is still recovering from COVID. Even now, I mean, we've talked about this, how, I don't know, everybody thinks with the growing popularity of Halloween is a little bit outstripping the ability of the suppliers to supply it with stuff for themed like this. I mean, Home Depot is one thing, right? I guess even though Home Depot's had problems, stocking the
Home Depot's had problems
skeletons.
as well. It's the supply chain, and I've dealt with
Yeah.
this. I've dealt with this in all of the haunted attractions and all of the Christmas attractions that I've been working on this year. There are uh, there are things like, for example, Creatures of the Night at Zoo Tampa just opened, which is a family-friendly zoo event at the zoo in Tampa, hence the name Zoo Tampa. They opened night before last, and that was supposed to be their grand opening. But we had an excuse here in Tampa. We had a hurricane go through, so
Mm.
we the hurricane came through on the night that was supposed to be our final dress rehearsal. So what we did is, and by we I mean the zoo, because I'm an outside contractor. But what the zoo did is they positioned that first night, which would have been their grand opening, as their preview night, and preview / dress rehearsal night. And so we had an excuse, but it's happening everywhere. And I can also say that even things like, there are certain lighting elements that have not shown up yet. We have some lighting elements from a pretty major distributor that were ordered in May that are not here yet.
Hmm.
So there is that product chain challenge that we're having. There's some transportation issues as far as getting things to and from different locations. We've talked about staffing until we're blue in the face, but there's been a lot of different challenges and a lot of different reasons. I mean, we've even had one situation where something we thought was going to open late because, and this is not Zoo Tampa, this is another client, but where we actually thought that something was going to open late because the executive team changed their mind as to where they wanted something. So we were in the process of moving it, and we were hoping that we could get it moved in time. But there's a bunch of reasons to delay, and I think, and I'm just gonna speculate here, but I think that part of the reason that the higher ups are less concerned about Halloween events opening late or opening in a staggered manner is because they're starting so darn early. They figure, well, we still got plenty of time to
Hmm.
cash in on the Halloween dollars. And and I think the reason it's happening is because they still haven't quite adjusted their mindset. They're still thinking Halloween is October, but it's not if you're opening the last weekend of August, or if you're,
Hmm.
trying to open the first weekend of September. Um, so their internal planning has not quite made it yet. Um, they're still trying to figure that out. So I think there's a bunch of different reasons that we're seeing these delays. And I think, as you say, Philip, I think it's supply chain issues that haven't quite recovered yet. I think it is internal planning that hasn't quite made it to the earlier dates. And I think it's just simply the fact that we're opening earlier, and
Yep.
some of the parks may not have completely recovered from a summer rush. So they just have to remember, we just have to remember that you have to, once you back one thing up, if it's a domino effect, and it has to go all the way back to your planning at the beginning of the year. Because
Hmm.
you can say, well, how can something at the beginning of the year, how is that it, let's say, for example, Christmas strike. Well, if you back up your Halloween install by 2 to 3 weeks, then everything else just gets knocked backwards, and you can't strike Christmas before Christmas. So you have to condense in there somewhere, and you have to figure out how you're going to do that.
I wonder if, like, do you think there's any damage here? Because I hear what you're saying, and I definitely agree. Like you said, I think we're in agreement on all those elements. I'm wondering though. I think way back when we first broke the story about Fright Fest Extreme, we talked about how they were partnering with these IPs, and I wonder, is there any risk of damage to either the Six Flags brand or the IP because of this, or like, is anyone going to be upset, or is it one of those things where, like you say, like everyone's like, eh? Because I mean, this is not the only location to have opened IPs late and to have gotten some heat for it. But the other part of my brain is like, does it even matter? Like,
Well, that kind of
who
goes,
cares?
but that kind of goes back to, because they opened so early, they've got plenty of time to make up the quote unquote loss.
Well,
Um,
but I mean, isn't
and
it?
there's and there's also the possibility that, and I'm not going to play the conspiracy theory card here, but there's also the possibility that people who wanted to come early are then now forced to come back a second time to see the delayed elements that they missed the first time they were there. So there's that. Will it hinder? Is it a black mark against Six Flags? I don't know. It sure would be for me if I were, because back when I was the avid haunt goer, I would
Yeah,
always go as early as I possibly could. Um, and if you tell me it's going to be open at such and such a time and then it's not, I think where it might end up hurting them is less in their reputation and more in their ticket sales. I think what's going to happen is, people are going to go, well, I'm not going to get tickets for the first weekend. They won't have everything.
exactly.
I'm not going to have tickets until the end of September or the middle of October or the beginning of October. So it's going to hurt their early ticket sales. That has already happened with some of the clients that I'm working for. Their early reservations and their early ticket sales are a little soft. Um, but I'm not really sure why. I think perhaps it is, that because they keep expanding, going earlier and earlier, and the you're going to hit a point where earlier doesn't mean more. Earlier just means more spread out.
Yeah.
And
Well, especially if it's not, if they have a reputation for being a hot mess, which they do, um, then going earlier, like you kind of like you cut yourself off at the knees, right? Because if you don't have a reputation for being ready, then you can't actually get more revenue. You're
Mhm.
capped because the customers aren't going to believe you that you're open in time,
Correct.
which I think
Correct.
is the biggest risk. But do you think there just wasn't a clause in the IP agreement that they were going to open on a particular date or with a particular quality standard, or like what do
Well,
you think?
there's another story that we're going to talk about here,
Yeah.
about IPs that, I mean, quite honestly, the IP doesn't care. They get paid whether you open or not.
Yep. That's
It's
true.
there's no clause. There's a clause that they get paid whether you are open or not, and we'll talk about that more in one of our next stories.
Yeah. Well, I just know because I know that happened at Universal one year where they had to open. It was in the contract they had to open the IP for Halloween. But
Yeah, I think they've probably learned
yeah,
from that and decided, let's just say we get paid.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Well, our next story is about police imposing a curfew, county curfew in response to the Busch Gardens Williamsburg. So this was not this week. Actually, this week we it's like every week something's happening. But this week there was a big mass chaos. That's literally the quote from the police. Is actually mass chaos that happened in King's Dominion. So that's what happened this weekend. This story that we're talking about is from the previous weekend, but essentially we're going to go pretty quick through this, but Howl-O-Scream in Williamsburg introduced a chaperone policy. Now, what's interesting about this, which is why we're talking about this, because chaperone policies aren't big news. What was the bigger news, in my opinion, is that on September 19th, the James City County Police Department, which is the police department that is around Busch Gardens Williamsburg, they imposed a curfew on their own, saying that anyone ages 17 under must be accompanied by a parent, guardian, or custodian between midnight and 5 a.m. Okay, so it applies anywhere in James County, not just Busch Gardens Williamsburg. And even though Howl-O-Scream's, so their Howl-O-Scream's hours vary depending on the date, but its latest closing time is 11 p.m. But it's county-wide, which means that that could impact a lot of those things. And basically, it was a direct response to the chaos happening at Busch Gardens Williamsburg. So to me, that's what makes it interesting here. So we have chaos happening at Busch Gardens Williamsburg, and then the police are like, if you're not going to do anything about that, I mean, they didn't say this. I'm just narrating for you guys what happened in my head, but there was no statement about this. But essentially, it seems like the police are saying, if you're not going to take care of it, we are, and we're going to put a curfew in this area that's going to impact guests leaving your event. So you can't just, let your kids go, and then, because you're going to need, the curfew's in effect. So you got to make sure they have a guardian with them. So it's like the police department was reacting to what was happening to take the control out of the park's hands. And then the park responded by putting their own chaperone policy in place. That's what makes this interesting to me, is that at least to my recent knowledge, recently, I haven't seen it where a county has been like, no, you're not doing a good enough job. We're going to like kind of supersede what the park is doing by doing our own version. And then that forces the park to do something after the fact. So, but I don't know, Scott, what do you think about this?
I'm gonna guess, and again, I have no insider information. I did work in the Williamsburg Park for 2 years. I was there for 2 seasons. This was many years ago, but I did work there for 2 seasons. And the way this reads to me is the the police force coming to Busch Gardens, or Busch Gardens coming to the police force, and it looks to me like they're working together on this
Mm,
one. I don't think it may have appeared this way because of announcements and when things were announced, but I would guess that, if there was some incident, which there was, if there's an incident, then Williamsburg is going to go to the police force and say, "Hey, can you guys help us?" And the police force is going to say, "We can, but you got to put up some sort of help as well."
yep.
So, no theme park works independently from the local law enforcement, especially during Halloween.
Mm,
Busch Gardens Tampa, for example, used to hire off-duty police officers to actually be in uniform, present in the park throughout the run, to help with security issues.
yep.
So I'm sure this was a give and take. I'm sure it's something that was probably very quickly negotiated.
Yeah.
Um, but it's I don't necessarily think it's police or park, one pushing the other or one leading the other. I'm guessing this is two parts of a single plan.
Okay, I get it. So they're working together that way. It kind of makes it less like a blame on just the park. So the parents aren't getting as angry at the park because,
Correct.
now they're like, oh, it's the county as well. So the calculus goes from, well, we can't drop off our kids at the park, blah blah blah, to like, oh well, it's a whole county curfew because of Halloween, and so now, it's not just the park's fault.
Everyone's on the same page, and everyone's trying to facilitate the same end result. And I think,
Yeah,
if I were to guess, that would be my guess. It's that they're working with
interesting.
police so that neither of them have to take the full blame, and they can. It looks like a united front, which I think
So
is important.
then how come nobody else is doing this? So just to clarify too, before we tackle that, Busch Gardens Williamsburg did have an incident. I forget, because to be honest, there's been an incident every week
Hmm.
for Halloween events. I think it was a stabbing, or it was something happened in Williamsburg, and so this is a reaction to an event that happened.
Sure.
But even just this past weekend, there was that like pure chaos right at King's Dominion. So um,
Well, and King's
ve-
Dominion has always been, King's Dominion was the first park I ever went to that had metal detectors. And that
so
goes back
yeah.
probably 20 years. So,
But how come we don't? Because I mean, we've mentioned, at least on this show, and I've reported in my newsletter, about every weekend all across the country, especially at Six Flags and basically at the Cedar Fair, um, and I don't want to say like lower tier. I don't know what I'm saying. The non Disney parks, all these places, they've all had issues, right? How come they're not working? How come everyone isn't working with the police to do, like, I don't want to say like a nationwide curfew, but other counties doing the same idea where you're sharing this
well, let's start by saying Williamsburg is a small town.
okay,
Williamsburg is a tiny town,
just
and
easier for them to move faster to
it's
do
easy.
kind of a
Yes,
thing.
exactly. They can be much more. Um, it requires significantly less um, hoop jumping to get something like this in place. Um, Williamsburg, Busch Gardens Williamsburg is the 500-pound gorilla in Williamsburg. Colonial
Okay.
Williamsburg is a huge tourist destination. However, Busch Gardens Williamsburg is the 1-2 punch that brings people to the Williamsburg area. So they're going to work with um, the police force, the government, the local government, um, to make certain that guests feel safe, whether they are at the park, coming to Williamsburg, whatever. They're going to want guests to feel safe. Um, so anything they can do, whether it is a chaperone policy or a curfew or both. I mean, this way, basically what they're saying is, yeah, you can go to the park, but if you go to the park, you're not going to get home before midnight, which is when you have to have,
Yep.
if you're under 18, you have to
Yep.
have a person
Yep.
with you. So
Yep.
the park is going to say, well, we'll make that easier for you. You just have to have a person with you all the time, and they'll take you home.
Yep. Yep.
Because the real, the real shenanigans used to happen just before they went into the park and just after the event closed, because then they'd go out and they're all hyped
Yep.
up and they're going to go out and raise a little
Yep.
hell of their own.
Yeah.
So
A lot of the incidents we report on have happened at the end of the event when people were in the parking lot. Yeah.
parking lot, yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's unfortunately has been common practice for many years.
Yeah.
So I actually, to be completely honest, I support this, and having lived in Williamsburg, I can see the residents of Williamsburg going, whew, thank goodness, because it is a, or it was, I have, like I said, haven't lived there in many years, but it was a um, fairly affluent and
Yeah.
quiet town,
Yeah.
um, with two strong tourist attractions, but both of which are higher end and a little bit more posh.
Yeah.
So uh, I think this will make everybody in Williamsburg a little bit happier.
Okay, one last story to finish off quick here, which is what Scott referenced earlier. Sesame Street has won a legal battle against SeaWorld. The owners of Sesame Street have won a multi-million-dollar judgment against the owners of the SeaWorld theme parks. A federal judge has ordered SeaWorld, now operating under United Parks and Resorts, to pay Sesame Workshop 11.4 million US dollars. They upheld an arbitration ruling that Sesame Place, SeaWorld, and Busch Gardens parks owed millions in unpaid licensing fees from earlier this decade. The Sesame sued SeaWorld Parks last year for the money, which the theme park chain said it did not owe due to it being closed during the period where they were trying to get the money for. An arbitration panel rejected that argument, and now the judge had ordered SeaWorld to pay. The court order was first reported by the Florida Politics, but we're reading excerpts from the Theme Park Insider story of it. So yeah, essentially they were like, we don't owe it because we were closed during that time, and the judge says no.
Well, and again, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what was in the contract. My guess is, since
Well,
the judge,
clearly it said that you got to pay regardless.
you have to pay annually, and it's not based on number of guests that experience the IP or number of hours that the IP elements are open. You're paying for the IP, and you're paying for the IP from start date to end date, and then you renegotiate.
Yep.
So it sounds as though, if there has been situations in the past, like you mentioned with Universal, with IPs saying it has to be open by such and such a date,
Mm-hmm.
um, and I can see that for like a permanent installation, but for a Halloween seasonal installation, I don't know. I don't know.
That particular case was a Halloween installation. Yep.
Yeah, it's but again, I think they've kind of learned their lessons, and it's like, I'm sorry, I feel bad that it's an act of God. I feel bad that it's a situation where, we are closed because of a worldwide pandemic, or we're closed because of a hurricane. They're not going to they don't want to look at day by day ticking off, park was open, so we get paid. Park was not open, so we don't get paid. Does that, and that becomes a very slippery slope, because does that mean they get paid less if they reduce their hours, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's clear that at least in this particular case, Sesame Street said, "You pay us whether you're open or not." Well, speaking of being a slippery slope with time and all that sort of thing, our time has slipped away for this particular episode. So hopefully we will see all of you back here next week, and we may see some of you in our Green Tagged Pro or Green Tagged Unhinged, whichever it's called this week. I will still call it Unhinged.
We're sticking with Unhinged. I like that better.
You like that? Okay, good. We'll stick with Unhinged, which is our Patreon account, where you can get bonus episodes of Philip and I throwing off the gloves, talking a little bit dirty, and diving in deeper into what we want to. Talking a little bit dirty sounded really wrong, but diving a little bit deeper into some of the issues, and being a bit more straightforward about it. So hopefully we'll see some of you there. But if not, we'll see the rest of you next week here on Green Tagged Theme Park in 30.